All right, my friends, welcome back into the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. This is episode 189, and my guest on the show is Barb Flowers. And I got to be honest with you, I am thrilled to welcome Barb Flowers into the podcast. She is an exceptional school leader and a certified life coach who is genuinely making a big impact in the world of both education and in leadership. Barb is currently the principal of the U.S. Elementary Division at Eastwood Global, which is an innovative online and homeschooling program. She's going to talk a little bit about that and kind of help us understand just exactly how that all comes together. She combines the experience she has as a public school principal and this passion that she has for coaching to help school leaders simplify their work, to prioritize what matters most, and to thrive in their roles. Just listening to that, you know, Barb and I are going to get along great, right? And in this episode, Barb is going to share her journey from brick and mortar to leadership in the virtual world. She's going to share some proven strategies she has for reducing stress, for setting boundaries, and also for things that principals can do to really help build their self-belief and some clarity in their leadership. Yeah, that's right. Clarity in their leadership. Imagine that. You know, that's a big word for me, and I am absolutely stoked to hear Barb talk about that. So whether you're looking for just some practical tips to do a little bit more taking control of your time, or you're looking for a little inspiration to lead with intention, this conversation is absolutely packed with value. So let's dive right in with Barb Flowers. All right, my friends, welcome back into the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. My guest today is Barb Flowers, and I'm excited to have this conversation because, you know, anytime I have an opportunity to talk with a principal, it's always so exciting to just learn about what they're doing, about the work that they have going on. And anytime I have the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who's doing any coaching or consulting in the space, it's a lot of fun to just learn what they're doing and what they're seeing. And as it turns out, Barb's in both of those spaces. So that's going to be a lot of fun today. Barb also is a podcaster. She's got a wonderful podcast that we will make sure and link in the show notes, so you can go check that out. So all of that to simply say this, Barb Flowers, welcome into the Leaning Into Leadership podcast.
Thank you so much, Darrin, for having me on. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited, like I said, about this conversation. So let's maybe set the table just a little bit for my listeners and viewers who maybe don't know Barb Flowers. Give them the however many, flights we're going up on the elevator. You know, let's maybe keep it at about, 15 floors. Let's not go too far on the elevator, but give them the elevator version of who Barb Flowers is.
Yeah, so I was in public education for 14 years, 6 years as an elementary teacher, and then 8 years as an administrator, 2 years assistant principal, and 6 years as a principal of my own building. And then I actually left the role. I was podcasting and doing some coaching while I was a principal. And I decided that I wanted to do coaching full time. So I have been coaching principals on time management, stress, overwhelm, setting boundaries. And then recently actually took a leadership job as the principal of the U.S. Elementary Division at Eastwood Global, an online school and homeschool program. So I'm also helping launch that while I do my coaching and consulting. So a lot of different things going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and certainly a few things there that I want to chase after and have you maybe talk a little bit more about. And I'm going to work maybe in reverse order here. So you were a brick and mortar principal, and now you're in this virtual space, this online space. Tell me what that is like. What are some of the things that are similar? What are some things that are like wildly different than when you were in a brick and mortar building?
Yeah. So actually, this is a new position where I'm getting to help create the school. So that is like the most exciting thing. I am recruiting the teachers, recruiting students, and helping to develop the curriculum. So I get it. It's an IB curriculum, International Baccalaureate. And I also were focusing it around the science of reading for those elementary kids learning to read. So it really is kind of very exciting. It's like the dream where you get to pick everything you want to see in education. And how it's going to play out in a school. And I'm looking forward to getting teachers hired, getting students started, and actually seeing how I transition my leadership from the brick and mortar school into that online environment. I am trying to make it as similar as possible, where I still visit classrooms and I'm very involved with students. So it'll be a definitely different approach because I won't know them in person. But I'm taking my experience from COVID and thinking a lot about how that went and how I was still able to engage with students as the principal and support teachers and, continue to help them build their professional growth in an online setting. And that's, what I'm kind of planning for the fall. So I'm excited. It'll be a good learning experience.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So do you anticipate, will you have teachers like from all over? Are you going to keep them like within a geographic area where you could pull them together? What is that going to look like?
Yeah, I can really hire from anywhere in the U.S. So I can have teachers all over. So we will be in different time zones, which will be unique. And yeah, it can be a challenge, but I'm excited to see how that goes. But different perspectives. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool. Honestly, it's bringing up like all these other questions in my head, and that's not really what our topic is today. But I just got to ask this one. I'm just kind of curious. You mentioned, some of the differences you mentioned. Obviously the experience that all of us who were in public ed during the COVID years, that whole, everybody's on a Chromebook kind of thing. Especially with elementary and especially with early elementary. That's when we're really leveraging our time in front of our students to not just grow a love of learning, but really teaching students how to read. What does that look like, or how might that look a little differently in a pure online environment? I know it's been happening for quite some time, but all of my time, except for that little COVID window, of course, was spent in brick and mortar. And so when you said something there, it just made me kind of curious.
Yeah. So the plan is, because it's a homeschool online kind of hybrid, is that we get to set up these expectations ahead of time with parents. And so the plan is to offer a lot of education to the parents so that they can also support what the teacher's doing. The teacher will be doing the explicit instruction that they do in reading. But if the parent needs to remediate and do extra things at home, we'll offer those resources and how that works with phonics instruction, because many parents aren't trained in that. So it's a way for them to support their student at home and give them that one-on-one, and then to educate the parents as well. Also, with it being IB education, everything is inquiry-based, constructivist approach, where they are really constructing their own knowledge. So when it comes to like math, science, social studies, everything's going to be that inquiry-based learning, which I think the online model is a great way to do that, where they can have those discussions online, but some time to explore and research on their own as well.
Yeah. Again, I could just like keep going with questions on this. I think it's really fascinating. And like I said, honestly, with the lead in, anytime I get the opportunity to spend time with a principal, I just love to hear what it is that they're working on, what they're learning. I mentioned to you before we hit record, I was in a building here in Omaha today with one of the principals that I support and support his building. And just, anytime I get the chance to pick the brain of a principal, I love to do it. But you said something also. I had mentioned I was going to work backwards, so I want to come back to something you talked about, the work you do now with coaching and with consulting, and specifically with helping leaders maximize their time, reduce the stress, reduce the overwhelm. You and I have had a number of conversations. Obviously, I was on your podcast, and I'm pretty certain I talked about, about being clear, about being intentional. So we certainly have some parallels here. But what brings you to that space? What makes you want to focus on that particular piece? There's so many things that we as leadership coaches, as leadership consultants can focus on, but that's kind of the area you've leaned into. Obviously, I've leaned into my space. Tell me why that particular topic for you.
Yeah, I feel like it took me a while, but I created systems and had things in place where I had great work-life balance by the end of my time as a public school principal. At first, I wasn't as good at it, but I learned systems for time management, for delegating, and for really setting boundaries with myself. I remember being a new principal And literally I would go home, I'd talk about work, I'd think about work, I would do work. And I had 2 little kids at home. And so I had to figure that out. I had to figure out how was I going to learn to actually disconnect and have this balance between being at work and being totally present and being there, but then being at home and being present. And I think honestly, one of the influences I had was the superintendent I worked with was very good at this. He was an experienced administrator. You know, he had been a principal and didn't have those boundaries and learned the importance of setting them. And so I got to see him. Even we'd have conversations. I'd meet with him and he would leave at 4:00, shut his email, even if he had one he needed to write, and he'd be like, I'll do it tomorrow. And I was just amazed at the fact of like nothing was a big deal. You know, I thought everything was so urgent and he was so calm about things and like, I can handle it tomorrow. Nothing's on fire. And so that kind of led me to this space of creating better boundaries. I took email off my phone. And then I got certified in coaching and I started coaching my teachers on this. We would do a lot of personal development and staff meetings. And I coached them on boundaries. I coached them on communicating boundaries with parents about setting boundaries, because what I noticed after COVID is my teachers were just taking text messages, you know, Remind, Class Dojo, whatever they had on their phone all weekend. And they would be upset because this parent texted them and it ruined their whole weekend. And I'm like, you know, you have to take accountability of what you can control. And you can choose not to open that app and have it off your phone. And, you know, there are some things we can put in place to help you. And I, as your school leader, am supporting that and telling you that you need to do that. And so then I was also big on modeling that. So that was just, and I saw how much they appreciated that. And they were funny because then they started saying, you know, I want to respect your boundaries. And I'm like, well, you can call me outside of school, but I appreciate that. You know, like we all just had this common understanding that when we're at work, we work hard. When we're at home, we relax and we're with our families.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And certainly, you know, when your staff is saying things like, hey, I want to respect your boundaries, that reinforces, I'm sure for you, that you've done the right work, not only in creating those boundaries, but in reinforcing with your staff how important those boundaries are for them. You know, there's a lot to be said for them using that language that you are trying to really push forward. So let's go a little bit deeper with that. So you mentioned, you know, that you helped your staff identify, you know, how to set those boundaries, how to, you know, lean a little bit more into that work and life balance. So a lot of the listeners here on the show are probably leaning forward a little bit saying, okay, Barb, tell me how to do that. Because I know, like you, I was the same way. And I think probably almost everybody who's become a building level administrator or a district level administrator or whatever knows that when you first jump into the role, you feel like you got to do everything. You feel like you got to throw on the cape and be the superhero, right?
Yeah.
Once we get a little bit experienced, we understand, hey, that's not necessarily what we have to be, but it doesn't mean it's not still a challenge. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of those boundaries. You choose, 100% dealer's choice here. You choose a boundary or two that you would recommend or that you would be sharing with somebody you might be coaching. So kind of coach our audience here a little bit on how to set some of those boundaries and what are some steps they should take.
Yeah. So one boundary I would definitely set is taking email off your phone. When I did that, it was a game changer. At first I was really hesitant, and honestly, I got comments from my colleagues because they'd be like, oh, I forgot you don't have email on your phone, you know? And I'm like, I don't. And I would say it proudly. Like, I felt like they kind of tried to shame me a little bit. But I just didn't. I felt like if there was something I needed to see, I would see it the next day. There was never an emergency that somebody couldn't call me if I wasn't answering my email. You know, every principal has those things come up that you need to be contacted after school. And everybody who needed to contact me had my cell phone, so they would call me. Because again, I would be like the teacher. I'd check my email at 4:00, get an angry email from a parent, and it would upset me. Where now, if I check my email at 8:00 the next day and called the parent, usually they had worked it out by the time I called them at 8:00 in the morning. You know, I gave them that space. I didn't even know it was happening, and they figured it out themselves. So that's probably the number one tip that I would give. Another tip I would give is limiting the initiatives that you do and telling your staff no. I really had to get better at thinking about what am I implementing in the building. I like to be innovative. I like to implement new things, but I realized over time that we were creating systems that weren't sustainable. They weren't simple, like they weren't necessary. I thought they were what was best for kids, but really I was just creating too much for teachers, other staff members, and myself. And so sometimes it's hard to constrain what we want to do, but going slow and focusing on the right things and going deeper and making sure they're done right is way better than trying to implement everything at once. So that is another boundary, is saying no to teachers when they want to do something, and really saying no to yourself, thinking things through and making sure that you're checking in with yourself on why you want to start this new initiative.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really powerful one right there, because I think a lot of us fall into that trap, right? We'll see something in the data, or we'll notice a trend in classrooms when we're doing classroom walkthroughs, and we'll think, oh, we need to do this, or oh, we need to do this. Or I worked under the assistant superintendent who every time he went to a conference, we just cringed because we knew, oh boy, he'll come back with something new. Brilliant man, but he chased everything shiny. And the more that we put on our teachers' plates, the more difficult it becomes for them to actually get the work done that they need to get done. Because I'm sure in your experience, like mine, you'll have that 30% or whatever who, you say, hey, we need to do this, and they're going to do it. They're going to go do it, and they're going to work hard for you. And then the middle chunk is going to be like, well, maybe, and you'll still have a few that are going to resist. But the more we ask of them, sometimes the more complicated we make the job, right?
Right, right.
Let's maybe talk about that a little bit. Why is it that we, as school leaders, have this habit of overcomplicating the job?
I think we feel like we're not doing enough, right? I think most school leaders, and I talk a lot about this too, have this hint of self-doubt. We all have this, I call it the judge in our brain that's constantly like criticizing us. And that's where thought work comes in, that we do in life coaching. But it's this thought that I'm not doing enough, I'm not good enough, and you go to a principals meeting, let's say, like I was in a principals group and it was 40 local principals, and you share what's going on. And I sometimes think we get into this place of comparison, and then we think we're not doing enough in our building. Like, look what they're doing in their building, and I'm just doing this. And so then we feel like we're not good enough, and we should be doing this because we know it's best practice, or we heard this thing and it's really good for kids, and we want to be doing what's really good for kids, instead of just pausing and thinking about what we're doing right now is good. We never think we're doing enough. I used to see that myself even as a teacher, and I think teachers do that too, right? We want the next thing to make us better, but in the end, when we're doing so many things, it doesn't. It really just makes us spread too thin, and we can't focus on the things we need to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, there's a lot to be said for that self-belief, and that that reflection that we have of our own self. Sometimes people will even talk about that as like the imposter syndrome, right? Am I really worthy of this job? I need to continue to prove myself. The principal I was working with today, we had that exact conversation about, he's 3-4 years into his principalship and still feels like I need to prove them right for hiring me. And
right.
He's done amazing things. His school is rated at the highest rating level it can earn in the state of Nebraska. He's doing all of these amazing things, but he continues, and he's not alone, he continues to think, I need to prove that they hired the right person. So this kind of leans a little bit maybe into that life coaching side of what you do. But I want to have you talk a little bit about kind of that inner self-belief. I've heard you talk about it before. I've read some of the things that you've shared, and I think there's so much here that can be of value, especially early in 2025, right? Where many of us are trying to kind of maybe reinvent ourselves a little bit, lean a little bit into that self-belief piece.
Yeah, so it really comes from, in life coaching, we call it thought work. So every day focusing on thought work and really being aware of what your thoughts are I coach on a process we call the T cycle. So your thoughts create your emotions, which create your actions. So if you're having the thought, I should be doing more, it creates an emotion of self-doubt. And then your actions come from a place of self-doubt, right? Like you're going to be trying to do more. It's not going to be good stuff, but you're going to be like grabbing at whatever you can to do more and show people how great you are. Where if you have the thought, I'm good enough right now as I am, then the feeling, the emotion that comes from that is usually a place of confidence. And then the actions that come from that are from a place of confidence, where you might be taking action, where you have systems in place. It's just the small day-to-day things that add up to make a big difference. So I think having that thought work is so big. And one of the things I really like to tell people too is to try something from, her name is Byron Katie. And she does what's called turnaround thoughts. And basically, with any thought that we have, we can find evidence for that thought. So, if I said I'm energetic right now, I can find evidence of where I'm energetic. If I said I'm super tired, I can find evidence for that. Either way, right? Those are total opposites, but you can find evidence usually to support a thought. And so if you have a thought like, let's say you say the teachers don't respect my leadership. Okay, so you take that thought and you have this self-doubt about teachers respecting you as a leader. You could turn that thought into, I don't respect my leadership. And then start brainstorming all the ways that you notice you have evidence that you don't respect your leadership, and see where that comes from. And it really opens up your mind in a different way, because you start to see that teachers aren't questioning you, you're questioning yourself, right? So the problem isn't the teachers, and we try to make the problem somebody else, but really we need to focus on the problem within ourselves so we can control it. So if we're always doubting our decisions, what can we do to stop that? How can we start feeding ourselves those more positive thoughts to create more positive emotions and actions? And so one thing I like to do with principals is actually give them affirmations that they can use and find evidence for. So like, if you were to say, I make decisions quickly, think about times that you as a principal have been able to make decisions quickly without questioning yourself, and you were happy with that decision. And you're going to find evidence there to support that so that you can start to believe that thought. So really here, you want to pick those positive thoughts and gain as much evidence as possible so that you can spend time in belief in the new thoughts. Because really, our personalities, everything we think about ourselves is just made up of a bunch of thoughts, which is really kind of crazy. And it always blows my mind when I think about it. And you get to choose what those thoughts are, which is the fun of coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that. I really do. I think there's so much cool stuff there, and I want to loop it back to something that we were talking about a little bit ago, and really give you an opportunity to just hammer this thing home, right? So what I am hearing you say is I need to be really mindful and a little metacognitive of my thoughts, and understand that primarily I can control myself. I can, the primary area of control is within me. So as a result of that, or rather, as I'm hearing you say that, what it's making me think is, as leaders, we need to be a lot more intentional about finding time to check on our thoughts, and obviously not be so reactive, be a whole lot more proactive. So coming back to how do we take some ownership of our time? How do we avoid the overwhelm? Because when we're overwhelmed, that's when those thoughts, those negative thoughts really creep in and really take over and take root. And then we start to question ourselves as leaders. And I mean, the whole thing is a spiral, right? So again, let's loop this back. Tell our listeners how they find the time to really focus on those thoughts so that they can be moving forward in a positive direction.
Yeah. So I'm all about having routines in your day. I'm about morning routines before I got to work. And then even when I got to work, I always had very simple routines. And so one of the things I did after announcements, I would do announcements at 9:00. And then I would go in my office and I would kind of collect myself for the day, check my email, see what I had going on. During that time, I would write down 3 priorities for the day of the things I needed to get done. They were non-negotiables. And then another thing I do that's part of that habit is it's called a brain dump. So I just take any thoughts in my head and I could think about, what am I thinking about the day? What am I thinking about my teachers? What am I thinking about the students? And just try to set a timer even on your phone for 2 minutes. And it's just like when you were a kid and you'd have to journal for 2 minutes without stopping, right? But you're just brain dumping any thought that is in your head. And sometimes thoughts come out when I start to like question myself about, what am I thinking about teachers, students, parents, the people around me I'm working with, that I didn't even realize I'm having. And so I'm really bringing out those subconscious thoughts that I don't even know I'm having. And then that's where we can look at, okay, this thought is what's causing me a negative result.
I love that. I think that's outstanding. And I totally agree with you. I mean, folks, make sure that you are setting that time aside. I would block it on your calendar, whether that's, better for you in the morning or it's better like, in the evening right before you leave the office. I mean, whatever it is, make sure that you're setting that time aside so you can be showing up as your best self. Oh, man, Barb, this is so fantastic. And of course, like always, our time has absolutely flown by. So we are at that point in the show where I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody that I get to host here on Leading Into Leadership. It's the Leading Into Leadership podcast. So tell me how you, in addition to all the awesome stuff you've already shared, how are you leaning into leadership right now?
Yeah, I'm really like leaning into how I can continue to develop as a leader in all of these different ways, and really combine my leadership and coaching together. So like I said, I had got my coaching certification while I was a principal, but now that I've been coaching more and have refined my practice, I've really been leaning into, how do I use that to better support the teachers I'm recruiting and the students, but even the people I'm coaching, the principals, how I'm helping them coach people better. That's one way I'm leading others to better coaching, I think, has been a really interesting thing to watch happen. I haven't been so intentional about it in the past, but I've seen it happening in conversations. And so that's something I want to continue and really grow in.
Outstanding stuff. All right. So, Barb, people are going to want to get in touch with you. They're going to want to follow you on social media. They're going to want to listen to your podcast. So tell the listeners, how do they find Barb Flowers?
So my podcast is The Principal's Handbook. I'm on LinkedIn at Barb Flowers, PhD, Instagram, Dr. Barb Flowers, and you can always find me on my website at barbflowerscoaching.com.
And there we go. Folks, we'll make sure all that stuff is in the show notes for you so you have easy access to that. Barb Flowers, thank you so much for joining me here on the Leading Into Leadership podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, awesome conversation with Barb Flowers. Everything you need to get connected with Barb is down there in the show notes. Make sure you go and check that out. Again, big thank you to Barb for joining me here on the Leading Into Leadership podcast. And now it's time for a pep talk. And this is what I want to talk about today. I'll be honest with you. I had a really busy week. I was in schools a lot this week, and there's so many things that really stood out to me. But the thing that I want to talk about really goes to an experience I had with a district on Friday of this past week. I was in Columbus Public Schools in Columbus, Nebraska, working with the entire staff. I opened the day with about an hour and 15-minute keynote, and the focus of the keynote came directly from the work that the superintendent, Dr. Chip K, is leading in that district. The focus is that everyone can lead. He has this incredible passion, this incredible compelling belief that everyone can be a leader in his district. And he has worked so hard to instill that in literally every single person who works in the district. And so as I worked with the 550 to 600 people who were in attendance that day, it became really apparent that they believe that statement, that they do look for opportunities for leadership. And not just, hey, I can be on this committee or I can do this, but what are some simple things I can do to make a positive difference in the life of a kid? Or what are some things I can do to make a positive difference in the life of one of my coworkers? It's an amazing thing that they've got going on there. I just wanted to give Columbus a shout out. Hopefully some of you all are checking out the podcast now that you had an opportunity to hang out with me for a day. Just some wonderful things that are happening there. So my challenge to you is this. As a leader, and if you're listening to this podcast, you're a leader. As a leader, what are you doing to seek out opportunities to make a positive difference for someone? Because to me, leadership is all about opportunity and then taking action. opportunity and intention. If you can pair those two things together, you can do amazing things. That's what I got for you this week, folks. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic final week of January. Get out there, have a road to awesome week.